7. And now with our lesson, Tim Junkins.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Michael and I were talking before service started this morning because I knew he was covering the communion lead, and I was talking to him, asking him if he was nervous or whatever, because it's only the second time he's done it, and he said that he had worked so diligently on it, and he looked at me and said, "I'm going to outclass you. It's so good." And I was like, he's bluffing. He's clearly bluffing. And then, that was beautiful. That was a good, challenging communion meditation, and that's something I always enjoy. Is when a lesson kind of like convicts you and challenges you. And all I gotta say is, Michael, it's my turn now. So we're gonna do good today. I'm feeling good. And the reason I slammed the podium is because I'm talking about tangibility today. The objects in the world that are tangible, like the physical objects. Like, I know what this podium sounds like when I knock on it. I know what it feels like when I touch it. It's because when we focus on the tangible objects in our world, we develop a sense of familiarity with them. Like, for example, if I was to pull my keys out of my pocket, I put them in my hand and I do this every time. And those of you who own a car, you may feel something similar. You pull the keys out of your pocket, you know the weight of them. You understand like what is going on here. Except for this little Zips dry cleaning thing that's new, and it's kind of throwing me off a little bit, but I'll get used to it. But tangible objects that we have in the world, we develop a sense of familiarity. And what we have with objects in the world, we have a tangible sense of faith. And at first glance, that sounds kind of blasphemous. It sounds like, well, we're not supposed to have faith in the world. We're not supposed to have faith in objects. But realistically, we do. There wasn't a single one of you this morning who questioned the stability of the chair that you sat in this morning. There wasn't a single person who looked down at the chair and said, "Yeah, that'll probably hold me, but I'm not sure. Let me get my kid first to try out the weight, and then I'll go and say." No. You had faith in the object. The object was tangible. The object is something you're familiar with. This probably isn't the first time in your life you've sat down in a folding chair. When you turn the key with your car, when you flip a light switch, when you swipe your debit card at the 7-Eleven, there's a certain sense of faith in play, that you have faith in that object, that it will deliver its purpose. Now, ultimately, when we look at the idea of faith, we look at the idea of Hebrews chapter 11. Faith is when we look at the idea of spiritual faith, we look at the idea of, in Hebrews 11, this isn't our verse today, this is just a quick reference note, but in Hebrews 11 is the reference of faith is the evidence of things not seen. Faith is the thing that we connect to spiritually, that we use to bridge the gap between us and God. What we are looking at today is John chapter 20, and we're going to be looking at the story of Thomas, famously known throughout the spiritual and secular circles as Doubting Thomas, the disciple who, when Jesus came back from the dead, he said, "I just can't believe it." And that kind of reminds me of a trip we took. We had a bachelor party a couple of weeks ago for a friend of mine, and we decided to go to Ocean City for the day to kind of have a guy's day out. And one of the things we did was we went to the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Ocean City. And that was a totally cool place. But one of my friends was totally walking around going, "I believe it, I don't believe it, believe it, I don't believe it. I'm going to have to think about that when I'll come back." And I asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, it's the Believe It or Not Museum. I'm just kind of gauging, what is believable and what is not." And so Thomas is in kind of the same circumstance. Now, to establish, I said that Thomas is one of the 12. He's one of the 12 disciples, meaning he is part of Jesus' personal entourage. He has been following Jesus around. He has been watching miracles. He has been watching ministry. He has been communicating with people about the gospel of Jesus. He is there. He is there in the moment. This is an indisputable fact. He was a follower of Jesus. He was there. All right. So he was, what we look at today with our faith, when we look at the idea of Hebrews chapter 11, and we say, okay, like some people interpret that passage and they say things like, okay, well, the interpretation of Hebrews 11 is that we're supposed to interpret faith, we're supposed to believe it, and that's supposed to be good enough. We're supposed to just take that extra leap, and we're just supposed to be able to deal with it, to believe in Jesus because we're supposed to. But the reason that Jesus performed miracles is to establish this baseline of credibility. He didn't just walk in and say, "Hey, I'm the Son of God. deal with it. No, he went out, he healed the sick, he fed thousands of people, he performed all these miraculous events to establish to people that he was the Son of God. Now, the reason I say this, the reason that's important is because of what Thomas is about to say in John chapter 20. We're starting in verse 24. This is Jesus appearing to his disciples. This is post-resurrection, mind you. Now, Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came, meaning the first time that he appeared to the disciples. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hands into his side, I will not believe." Now, we as people, we say, "Show it to me." That's a common 21st century American attitude. We say, "Show it to me." We watch shows like NCIS and CSI and Law and Order because we as people, we're obsessed with the truth. High priority court cases that have taken place, the couple that have taken place over the last year, people agonize and analyze, and they determine upon themselves whether or not the person is actually guilty or not. And that's why we're so consumed by police procedural dramas. It's because we want to see the truth, and we say, "Show it to me." And people disconnect themselves from the idea of spiritual faith because it's not something that can be tangibly proven in the physical realm. And we say, "Show it to me." And we say, well, if I was a disciple, if I could follow Jesus, if I could see the personal events, then I would believe. But here is Thomas. Thomas, one of the 12, one of the first 12 chosen, who has seen all these things, who sat at the table during communion, which we celebrate symbolically every week. The person who listened to Jesus say, "Guys, I'll be back in 3 days." And he says, "You know what? I don't believe it. Show it to me." And it's a demonstration of our attitude as mankind, how even back then, before television and before proper forensic evidence and things like that, there was still the attitude of "prove it to me." Verse 26. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Thomas receives his evidence in this moment. Jesus appears to him and says, "It's really me. It's really me. I'm really back. I really wasn't lying to you." Because that was the big thing. I can watch somebody heal the sick. I can watch somebody multiply food into great quantities. I can watch somebody deliver awe-inspiring speeches. But when they say that they will raise from the dead, not raise somebody else from the dead, but raise themselves from the dead, that's kind of the breaking point. That's the part that Thomas had a hard time believing in. He said that, "I can't believe it. That's too much. Despite everything I've seen, despite all the miraculous things I've seen, this is too much for me to believe in." And so he requires physical evidence. All right, going back to Hebrews 11 really quick. One of the things, or a lot of the things that they talk about in Hebrews 11 is the idea of by faith. By faith Abraham, by faith Noah. All these people in the Old Testament who had these conversations with God, these personal encounters, these personal missions in life. The one I want to focus on just for a minute is the idea of Noah. Noah's kind of the Old Testament equivalent of this intangible faith that he's reaching for. God tells him to build an ark. God says, gather all the animals, gather the people who are willing to listen, put them in the ark, save them from the flood. And it's one of those things where people never think about the time frame. And this is the big thing when it comes to faith, is God is not on our schedule. That's the sad truth that we have to accept. God has a plan, God knows what He's doing, and God is putting it into motion. People lived a lot longer in the Old Testament. Noah worked on the ark for 120 years. Now, for those of you who didn't realize that, for those of you who find that hard to believe, just think about that for a minute. God personally delivered the mission to Noah. Noah built the ark. But he spent 120 years, day in, day out, 9 to 5, or probably longer than that, working on it. And think about the idea of dealing with people every day. Like, it's hard enough to be a Christian in a secular workplace, for people to challenge your faith, for people to say, I don't believe you, I don't believe in what you're doing. But for 120 years, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, just whatever, just day in, day out for 120 years. Noah worked on the ark. Just every single day, just gave it the best he could. Probably took some personal time at some point. It's a long time to go without a vacation. And he worked so hard, and he fulfilled his mission with God. And he was rewarded for it. But it's one of those things that the problem we have with faith is it's not that we require physical evidence. It's not that we require something. It's just the idea of fulfilling it, of fulfilling our mission to God, to realize that we could spend our entire lives, day in, day out, working on a mission for God and not see anything immediate for it. And that just irks us as people. The number one cause for people falling out of faith is they just think that God stopped listening, or they have a disconnect with Him, or they choose to walk away from Him. But God doesn't go anywhere. We do. We do as people. We get up. We walk away. We decide to abandon that part of our identity. And we decide to become totally different people. Because as Christians, we are defined by our faith. John 20, verse 29. Then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So Jesus delivers the physical evidence to Thomas. Jesus goes to Thomas, presents it to him, and he says, you have seen and you've believed. Good for you, buddy. But blessed are those who have not seen and who have believed. This is an object lesson that Jesus uses. That faith is not something that we follow because we have to. Faith is something that we follow because we want to. Every major religion, every major religious belief on the planet starts with the idea of faith. It's not an idea exclusive to our religion, but all religions. The idea that there has to be something else out there. That's how faith starts. And it develops from there. But faith is so intangible. Faith is just a gut feeling. Faith is like you look at the world and you look at how messed up it is, or how wonderful it is, or how short it is, or how long it is, and you go, you know what? There's probably more out there. There's got to be something else out there. There's got to be something to hope for, something to hold on to. In the beginning, I talked about the idea of tangible faith. The faith that we put in objects. I have faith in my car, even though I need to get an oil change next week. I can fulfill that obligation. I can put gas in the tank. I can keep up with the repairs, and I will have faith in the car. But here's the thing about faith, both physical and spiritual. Faith is entirely based on what you put faith in terms of the object. I believe that chair will hold me. I have faith that chair will hold me. In 100 years, will it hold me? Probably not. Because physical items do not last. I love my car. My car is great. My car gets me around. It gets terrible gas mileage, which kind of irks me sometimes, but it gets me around, and it gets me to work, and it gets me to church, and that's great. But one day, that object will fail me. One day, my faith in that vehicle will falter, because one day it will not start for one of many hundreds of reasons, it seems. Because whenever a car fails on you, that always seems to be the case. It always seems to be some weird thing going on. I remember the first time I lost an alternator on the car. I thought my car was going to explode because all the locks and all the lights and the radio and everything started freaking out all at once. And apparently that's what happens when your alternator goes. And so if I put absolute, because that's the thing, there's a difference between faith and absolute faith. There's a big difference there. I do not have absolute faith in my car. I do not believe that from here to eternity it is always going to get me to locations. I will eventually replace it. Objects are interchangeable. Light bulbs are interchangeable. You have faith in the light switch until that day, and we all know what this is like. That day that you flip it on and there's a brilliant flash and it's gone. And your faith in that light bulb has officially failed. So we have to look at the idea of absolute faith. Looking at verse 30. And this is craftily titled The Purpose of John's Gospel. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. They didn't get down every minute detail. They didn't get down every interaction, every handshake, every personal miracle that Jesus performed, but they got down the ones that mattered. Especially the one for Thomas. Especially the idea that Jesus, this God who became a man, who came down to earth, was able to raise Himself from the dead. The idea that He is able to come back. So we have to look at the idea of absolute faith. Like, where is your absolute faith placed? It is not placed in objects that will fail. It is not placed in ideas that will not hold, or lands that will crumble, or buildings that will. This building will not be around forever. It will change. It will grow. It will do all these miraculous things as buildings tend to do. But one day, it will be gone. It could be many, many, many years from now, but one day it will be gone. So we cannot put absolute faith in the building. And the most important thing is, we cannot put absolute faith in people. I have faith in people. I have faith in my friends and family, and I have faith in people I don't know, but I think I have a good feeling about. I have faith in you. I absolutely do. But we cannot have absolute faith in people, because ultimately we get into arguments. Ultimately we have problems and we have disagreements. And people walk, and I only say, and this is a dangerous game to play because my family is in the audience right now. But I say this because I have seen so many good people give it up and walk away because of their absolute faith in people. Because they could not see past that. They could not learn the object lesson of what it is to have absolute faith in a God who will never let you down. Because they put their faith in people. They put their faith in people that as soon as a rocky bump came up in the road, those people abandoned them. Those people let them go, and they said, you probably shouldn't go here, or we don't have faith in you anymore. And people look at that and go, oh, that's the church. And I would love to say that they're wrong. No, that's not the church, but it is. Because Michael talked about it this morning. Jesus is the head of the church. We are the body. We are the representations, and we need to be able to demonstrate to people that there is something to put absolute faith in. So the day that I'm not in a good mood, you guys don't go packing up. I'm a good person. I'm a snappy dresser, and I'm a darn good talker. Do not put absolute faith in me. It's a bad idea, because Michael, of all people, Michael was over at my apartment on Wednesday helping me rearrange my furniture after my apartment flooded a couple of weeks ago. We finally got everything back in place, but I was not in a good mood. Oh. So, and that's the truth that we have to face. I can put on my game face, I can bring my A game to church on Sundays, but ultimately I'm going to have a bad day. It's called a Monday. And so we have to realize that we have to look at the tangible spiritual faith. We have to look at the idea of absolute faith. The idea that there is this Jesus, that there's this God out there, that there is this answer to this question that we have been yearning for. And I encourage you today that if you're looking for that in whatever capacity it is, if you're a follower and you need prayers from the congregation, we're here. If you need to give up your life to Jesus, if you need to change your life forever, we're here. We're going to be here. We're going to be here as long as God allows us. Because I have absolute faith in Him that this is the plan. That this is where I need to be right now. And there have been challenges to that plan in my life. There have been nights where I've sat up and I thought, is this where I really want to be 5 years after college? Like they ask you when you leave college. They ask you during job interviews, where do you want to be 5 years from now? And we have these ideas and we have these plans. And when they completely fall apart, we have two options. We can accept the fact that God has set up this plan for us, that we are exactly where we need to be as long as we follow His instruction, or we can abandon it and walk away. Because those are really the two options. But I encourage you to not walk away. I encourage you to find faith, to strengthen yourselves, to have faith in people, but to have ultimate faith in God. I ask you to contemplate these things as we stand and sing the song of invitation. I pray.